Hello and welcome to Money Matters. I am Folashade Ogurinde. The Central Bank of Nigeria has adopted the NAFEX rate as the government's official exchange rate for the naira, effectively devaluing the currency by 7.6%. The bank posted the I&E rate on Monday on its website 2 weeks after it deleted the previous official fixed rate of 379 naira. This is coming almost 2 weeks after the CBN erased from its website the exchange rate that for about a year was seen as a government's official rate. Meanwhile, the Monetary Policy Committee MPC of the Central Bank of Nigeria CBN has voted unanimously to retain the monetary policy rate MPR at 11.5%. The asymmetric corridor of plus 100 and minus 700 basis points around the MPR was maintained. A CRR was retained at 27.5%, while liquidity ratio was also kept at 30%. The CBN governor explained that the committee chose to retain all parameters in order to continue its pursuit of supporting the recovery of the Nigerian economy. To delve more into this, I'm joined by the Chief Economist, Streetnomics Limited, Gospel Obele. Thank you very much for joining us on Money Matters. Now, what do you make of CBN's policy to adopt the NAFEX investor and exporter forex window rate at 410 naira 25 kobo as its official exchange rate to the dollar? And what factors do you think informed this decision?
All right, thank you, Shadi, for having me. Yes, so what the central bank is dealing with is quite a collection of so many factors and so many variables that seem to be beyond its control. And all of these things are rising now because there are fundamental structural deficits in the economy. And there's probably gotten to a point that the CBN, in trying to manage for the fiscal indiscipline and all that's currently happening, has taken more than it should, all right, and all that. So there's already an FX crisis on board. You know, there's a crisis around foreign exchange, foreign reserves, and how much are we earning enough in terms of foreign reserves, you know, to enable the economy bounce back, you know, as expected. And that answer is no. All right. So the central bank has to find more creative ways to protect currency flows and all that, and ensuring that the foreign exchange is made available to the market as much as possible, all right, to those who particularly need it for different reasons. But that's also to let us know that what the central bank is dealing with right now, it seems to be more like patching the problem than trying to deal with the problem at a fundamental level. And in dealing with the problem at a fundamental level, it will take beyond just the central bank to fix it. The exchange rate crisis has been around for a very long time, and it has been worsening over the years as we go ahead, all right, in 2021 and beyond. So I see it as a largely fundamental issue that the central bank is trying to use policies to patch through, you know, rather than trying to find creative ways around, you know, coordinating itself with the fiscal arm to solve this structural problem once and for all.
Now let's take a look at it from the holistic point of view. Do you think this policy will help the CBN achieve its aim of attracting more foreign exchange?
Well, technically, I don't think so. I don't see that happening because primarily when it comes to foreign exchange, we all know that almost 90%, 80 to 90% of transactions done in foreign exchange are not sourced from the conventional official market. All right. And what this means is that an increase in the prices or in the exchange rate in the official market is also almost double the percentage increase in the parallel market. All right. And we are going to see that in the coming days. All right. The exchange is going to rise, and then traders and the economic agents who engage, you know, external markets and all that, we would have to source, you know, we would have to find it more difficult to source for the dollar to facilitate transaction. And what that would also happen will be that it will increase the cost of selling, and that cost will be transferred to the final consumer. So it's just a chain of reaction that we're waiting to see that would happen. Of course, I understand that the CBN has no other option than to do what it's currently doing now as an institution. But I'm saying that the institution is overwhelmed and it's overburdened and stretched beyond limits. All right. And at the end of the day, it bounces back to the average Nigerian consumer or the average Nigeria at large.
Now, some experts have argued that such a policy will push cost inflation. Do you agree? And if this indeed happens, because currently, according to reports, the Naira is falling. It's currently trading for 491 to 493 Naira. So this is what we have on ground now. What do you think is going to go on from now on?
So this is exactly what I tried to explain in my last response. So yes, analysts have said it will lead to cost inflation. And what I tried to explain was that with this increase, all right, there will be almost double that percentage increase in the parallel market. And that's because over 80% of transactions, all right, in different markets, all right, are engaged through the parallel market. All right. So you hardly find somebody go to the bank to get an official rate. The banks will tell you they don't sell. All right. So you still have to go back to the parallel market to exchange, the Naira for dollar and other currencies. And let's not look at the dollar alone, because all of these items have ripple effects on other currencies, the pounds and the euro. So what would happen is that, yes, the dollar would increase like we've seen just now at 491 to 493. All right. And that would in turn, all right, lead to increase in the cost of selling or in the cost of purchasing or cost of facilitating business transactions and all that. And now, because simple economics states that cost will be pushed to the final consumer, the average producer, to retain his profit margins, would have to push that cost to the final consumer. So what you'll find out is that the cost per item of goods and services will increase, not necessarily because the consumer can afford more or there are other variables involved, but primarily because of transfer costs across the value chain, which has been the major and the core reason why consumables and items around basic necessities of life are seeing increased inflation or increase in prices over the past few months or the past 2 years. So yes, they're actually correct by saying it will lead to cost plus inflation, because that cost will be transferred across the value chain until it gets to the final consumer.
Now, let's shift gears a bit now. The CBN at the MPC meeting retained all monetary policy rates at 11.5%. Now, do you think a hold position is the right step for the CBN?
All right. So if you look at the communique very well, you realize that, like we've said several times on this platform, that the CBN is gradually getting to a place of let me just use the word, the CBN is gradually running out of options. And part of running out of options is not necessarily not knowing what to do, but part of running out of options is necessarily being caught in a web of so many technicalities and complexities. And being caught in this web will simply mean that the CBN is trying to manage for fiscal excesses. The CBN is also trying to manage for decreasing or depleting foreign exchange reserves. The CBN is also trying to manage an economy that is slowly but gradually coming out of recovery. But then again, it's more or less like, as we projected in January, a cautioned recovery, meaning that recovery would not rise at a fast pace enough for us to get out of it properly. What would happen is it will rise so slowly than before, and yet put us at a position where it's a lot easier for us to jump back to recession than it has ever been. So the CBN has a lot of these complexities to deal. And in trying to also manage the stimulus and policy support interventions that it's currently pumping to different economy, and where there are even questions around the design and the impact and results and all that. But that's a conversation for another day. So all of this web of issues, all right, creates the construct around the CBN decision, all right, and it tells you that the CBN is gradually running out of options and catching up in a web, being caught up in a web of economic complexities. So going forward, yes, it fairly looks like a reasonable, the whole decision fairly looks like a reasonable decision for now, because any decision towards an expansionary or contrary measure would hamper the economy further and frustrate efforts of different stakeholders to get the economy back to recovery. And let's not forget that the CBN and its policy, or the monetary policy, is gradually getting to a point where we'll start dealing in trade-offs. All right, not because we do not know what options are better, but because in trying to solve one policy problem, a larger and more complex policy problem will arise. And we saw this coming to a large extent, so we're not surprised.
Now, finally, I want your thoughts on this. What do you think is the solution to this? Because it seems like for every day there's a new problem, every new policy, like you said, shows another part to it. So what do you think is the solution here?
to be very honest, the solution has to revolve around thinking more sustainably. And the only way we can engage at that level is to deal with the core factors that has led us to this point. And it won't really cost us anything to deal with them. And that's particularly saying that we need to get back to the structural fundamentals of the Nigerian economy. A very quick win is to enable non-oil exports, all right, so that at least we can get in more foreign reserve, all right? If we can position a wider SME market to begin to export their goods and services, all right, ensure that both access to market and access to finance solutions meet somewhere in between, all right? It's a one-stop shop for access to finance solutions and access to market solutions for SMEs who are seeking to export, all right? Once we are being able to scale that, we'll be able to access foreign exchange at a more sustainable pathway, all right? And that would go a long way to help pushing a lot of the gaps and pressures that the CBN is currently facing. But for the CBN to see that kind of result, all right, such that it's even impacting its monetary policies and all that, there has to be a rekindled interest by the fiscal policy, all right? So the CBN is already taking too much. The CBN is running out of options. The CBN is drained, all right? And that's because there's a long history of fiscal indiscipline and more or less political correctness, all right, than political will to fix fiscal challenges, all right? So fiscal policy has to be uptight, all right? And then, fiscal policies have to be rekindled again, all right? And find strategically complementary ways, all right, to work with monetary policy to deal with the structural issues first, and as well as the structural quick wins, all right? Like I mentioned, non-oil exports and facilitated SME development. Once we can fix those structural quick wins, then we'll get a relatively reasonable, sustainable pathway to solving this problem. As far as if we don't get to do that, what would happen is that the CBN would come back in its next MPC meeting, and you'll see some level of confusion around what is the pathway to go, all right? And that's not necessarily the CBN fault, because a lot of the structural factors that apex institution is currently dealing with are way beyond its purview, all right? So it's really a pathetic situation to be in. But the core of the message is that the complementary efforts between the fiscal side and the monetary side has to deepen, and then priorities have to be placed around structural issues.
Well, we'll definitely keep tabs on these policies and see how well the progress. But thank you very much, Gospel Obele, CEO of Streetnomics. Thank you very much for your contributions on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And when we return, we'll discuss Nigeria's GDP growth of 0.51% in Q1 2021. Don't go anywhere. Just stay with us. Welcome back. For the second consecutive quarter, Nigeria has recorded a growth in gross domestic product with an increase of 0.51% in Q1 2021. This is according to the latest report released by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, NBS. The NBS further disclosed that the aggregate GDP stood at 40 trillion naira in nominal terms, as against 35 trillion naira recorded in Q1 2021, while real GDP stood at 16 trillion naira in the review quarter. The first quarter GDP report, however, showed some surprising turns. Joining me to discuss this development is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us on Money Matters. What does a GDP growth of 0.51% mean for the Nigerian economy?
What it means is that we have witnessed a marginal improvement in the performance of the economy. GDP measures performance. It measures the output growth. So it's an indication that we have moved marginally upwards from what we had in Q4 2020. In Q4 2020, we had a GDP growth of 0.11. In Q1 2021, we have a GDP growth of 0.51. It's a difference of 0.4%. So it's still very, very marginal. The impact may not be significant. But what is important is that we are still in a positive growth territory. And when we talk about a GDP growth performance of less than 1%, which is what we have, it shows that the economy is still struggling to recover from the shocks of the pandemic and even the recession that followed the pandemic. So it means that the economy is still struggling by and large. But we are happy that we are still in a positive growth territory. Having said that, of course, the GDP figures on sectoral basis showed a number of surprises. The first surprise has to do with the performance of the the manufacturing sector, which posted a GDP growth of 3.4%. In the last quarter, before the one that was reported, I'm talking of Q4, it recorded a contraction of 1.5%. And given what we know about the manufacturing sector, about the experiences that they have had in the last 1 year, especially around the foreign exchange liquidity, around the depreciation in the foreign exchange market, around the challenges at the ports, the purchasing power, the inflation, and the security. We never expected that we can have such a significant growth number from the GDP. But that is what we have. It was a pleasant surprise. The other surprise is the performance of the agricultural sector. We all know what has happened to the agricultural sector in the last 1 year around the issues of insecurity, issues of clashes between the herders and the farmers, the displacement of many farming communities and so on. And yet we had a figure of 2.28% GDP growth in the sector. So these were a few surprises, but it is what it is. There are some that are not too surprising, especially things like ICT, which posted a growth of over 6%, which is good given the fact that the ICT sector is one of the major beneficiaries of the pandemic and the recession that we had. Then it's also a bit disturbing that some sectors have remained in recession, particularly the hospitality, recreation, and entertainment sectors. They are still practically in recession. In this latest figure, they still posted a negative GDP growth. Hospitality posted a contraction of about 4.6%. The entertainment and recreation sector also posted a negative of 1.3%. This is very disturbing because these sectors have been down for over a year. And this is a highly employment elastic sector. A lot of small businesses operate in this sector. And it's of concern. And we hope that government will do something about that sector. Of course, we understand the worry about the government, about managing the pandemic, avoiding the spread, but we need to balance lives and livelihood so that we can get the hospitality sector, the entertainment sector out of this current recession.
Now, Dr. Muda, please tell us, what were the major drivers of the Q1 GDP growth?
The major drivers are first manufacturing, according to the GDP numbers, which grew at 3.4%. Agric was also a major driver. ICT was a major driver of the growth. I think principally these were some of the sectors that actually drove the growth performance. In terms of contraction, the biggest contraction we had in the GDP was transportation sector, which contracted by about 22%. That is very significant. And the implication of that is that the transportation sector has been also been suffering from some of the challenges around security, because road transportation is a major component of transportation sector. So if the sector is contracting by as high as 22%, that means that the fear of kidnapping and all of that has affected the sector. And the sector is also a very important sector because of the number of employment it generates. So the fear of kidnapping and all of that is also affecting the sector, and it has a lot of implications for people who have invested in transportation. So that of course is a major concern. I talked about the contraction in hospitality industry. Another sector that also contributed to growth was the electricity sector. Surprisingly, but we can say that this is perhaps happening because of the cost reflective tariff, because the sector also grew significantly by over 8%, which was significant. So that means investors in the sector are doing a lot better than what they used to do, even though they still complain that the tariffs are not high enough. But the worry about that is that it is one thing for the sector to be doing well, it's another thing for the citizens to be feeling a positive impact from a sectoral performance. So that remains is an issue that we need to worry about. But the electricity sector was also a major contributor to the growth that we have seen in Q1 2021.
Now, the manufacturing sector grew by 3.4%, indicating the first expansion in the past 3 quarters. What factors do you think propelled this?
The manufacturing sector figure is one figure that I have an issue with, because the figure does not reflect the current realities. First, most of the manufacturers had problem with the foreign exchange liquidity. They couldn't get their raw materials. Most of them are grappling with high inflationary pressures because of the cost of their raw material arising principally from the depreciation in the exchange rate. Many of them are having issues with the ports, clearing their raw materials out of the ports, and all the associated increases in costs, demurrage, interest costs, and all of that. Many of them are worried about grappling with the problem of weak purchasing power. It is why many of them are carrying very huge inventories. So, and of course, we have the security problem, which is even affecting the distribution of their products across the country. So if you have that kind of environment in manufacturing, and yet we say that the sector has grown by 3.4%, that for me is an issue. But the only small argument that one can maybe present is the fact that for the segment of the manufacturing sector that are not heavily dependent on imports or imported raw materials, or segments of the manufacturing sector that have done a lot in the area of backward integration, perhaps their performance was much higher. Perhaps the shocks of the foreign exchange problem was not too pronounced on them. And 2 good examples of that is the cement industry, which also posted very significant growth in Q1 2021. The food and beverage industry also posted very good growth performance. So the factor of backward integration, as I think, is also a factor that we can be looking at. But generally, the environment for manufacturing in the last 1 year has been very, very unfavorable. So that is why we were surprised that the sector moved from a negative GDP growth in Q4 2020 to a significant increase of 3.4% in Q1 2021. So there's a bit of mismatch between the empirical evidence and the figures that we have as far as the manufacturing sector is concerned.
Now, the oil sector contracted by 2.21% in Q1 2021. What factors do you think led to this?
Well, the oil sector, had been having issues. First, the refineries have not worked for a very long time. So the refineries have been posting very big negative performance over the past few years. Then, of course, we have issues with the issues of international price over the last few months until recently, that oil price started to improve. Then we have issues of policy, issues of regulation, issues of the non-passage of the PIB, issues around whether we are going to deregulate, we are not going to deregulate. There are a whole lot of uncertainty issues around the oil and gas sector. And of course, the output has also not done very well. We still have pockets of security challenges in the South, where the oil sector is predominantly based. So these are some of the problems that may have contributed to the decline or the weak performance of the oil sector during the review period.
Now, finally, Dr. Muda, are you seeing a sustained GDP growth in Q2 2021?
Well, it depends. It depends on what happens around our policies, around our environment, around our foreign exchange markets, around our financial markets, around infrastructure, around the ports, and also around our oil price and oil outputs. These are variables that will determine what will happen in terms of outlook of GDP. If these variables are favorable, we are likely to see a very good positive performance. The outlook will be very good. But if these variables are working in the negative direction, then the outlook may be gloomy. So it depends on all the drivers of growth, issues of foreign exchange liquidity, exchange rate depreciation, inflationary condition, the regulatory environment, the policy environment, the structural issues, the security environment. These are the things that will determine. So it's difficult to say whether it's going to get better or it's going to get worse. It depends on the context that happens as we move close to the end of Q2.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for your contributions on the program. And it's a wrap on Money Matters. Thank you for watching. See you next week. I am Folashade Ogunrinde. Bye for now.